Something I've noticed in the past month, and that is a lot of my plan reviews, I require what's called ventilation calculations. In the area where the engineer misrepresents the population requirement is, we're seeing a lot, it's called open offices. And they'll use, and I'll show you in the table just a second, but this is an example. In this area here, they call this office space with all those chairs. And they said this is office space, so there's only 5 people per 1,000 square feet in there. Well, obviously you can see that that is not true. So I went back to them and said, no, you're using the wrong table, because that office in the ventilation code has to do actually with individual offices. The real part of the table they should have used, this actually should have been classroom instead of it saying that was office, because it is. It's a real estate office building, and what they're doing there is it's an auditorium sort of, and where they teach real estate classes and whatever. It's the old art van on Woodward they're converting. So let me see if I can get this correct. If you notice here on offices, it talks about office spaces. And the number, the first number, I can scroll, I don't know if I can or not, but the first column is actually the population per 1,000 square feet. So if you look here, it's 5 people for every 1,000 square feet. But when you look at the plan, especially the furniture plan, they got them like in there like sardines. And actually, the more correct use of population would be telephone and data entry. These are people that call you like during the day and say that your extended warranty for your car insurance has been canceled and you need to renew with them. So what it is it's basically people operating telephones, you know, sort of like a boiler room situation where they've got all the people jammed in. That's the population rate that you have to use. And it increases the outside air requirement by over 50% based on those calculations. So usually when they're saying that, well, that's an office space. No, it's not. It's more of a telephone data entry area, and it's just they got all the people packed in there. So that's just something I've noticed lately in a lot of office spaces. They misuse the that number. That office space has to do with an individual office with just one desk and maybe a couple chairs, if you understand what I'm talking about. So
that argument, Mark, sorry to interrupt, you take it with the architect from the beginning, not on the inspection.
It's an easily misinterpreted code because they see the word office and they assume that's office, but it's not. It's really more of the data entry or telephone use. And that population, 60 per 1,000, is more realistic. Or if they want to go by the count of the actual furniture count, I allow them to do that. There's, but to say that there's 5 people, they're going to be under ventilated, and they're going to have some indoor air quality issues. So especially Troy, Southfield, trying to think what other cities that have a lot of office buildings. Rochester Hills, you'll see that, especially when they remodel and they increase the ventilation row by having more occupants. So let's go on to the PowerPoint. Okay, let's see. Okay, So this is about sections 505 through 509 of the kitchen exhaust requirements. Ever since I've come to Royal Oak, that's half our inspections. It's either multi-family residential units with some residential, but then Royal Oak that's all we do. Right now I've got 3 projects going in right now, restaurants in Royal Oak. So I have a lot of exposure in that. I think every city or municipality always has some restaurants going in as far as that goes. In the 2015 code, there was a major change. It used to read in the code, it would tell you what appliances would require a type 1 hood exhaust system. Well, or hood system or whatever. But now the code basically says every cooking appliance, if you look up the definition of a cooking appliance, requires some sort of hood, or there's exceptions. So technically, a microwave is considered a cooking appliance. And depending on what it's being used for, it might even require a hood, depending on what they're doing in it. There's warm food's one thing, but if they're cooking steaks, cook steaks in the microwave or not, then that'd be considered grease-laden cooking. So that is a major change. And also they solidified the language concerning where there's recirculating hoods or vent-free hoods. As far, even though they think they're out of the woods, they still have to provide some sort of ventilation exhaust system according to Chapter 4, and we'll talk about that. First of all, we're going to talk about domestic systems. And if you notice here, that plastic duct, that came with the exhaust hood. I don't know if you've run across it. And every time I go into a residential house and I see the shroud already in place, I say, I need that shroud taken down. And he said, why? Because I want to make sure that it's done in smooth sheet metal as the code requires. And it says right there that sheet metal ducts shall be constructed of galvanized steel, stainless steel, aluminum, or copper. Such ducts shall have smooth inner walls, so we can't even use that corrugated aluminum stuff that sometimes people will use. And shall be airtight and equipped with a backdrafter, and shall be independent of all other exhaust systems. So that is very important. In the commentary, it talks about domestic exhaust is not like commercial exhaust. They're totally 2 different animals as far as that goes. Commercial exhaust runs how many hours in a day usually? 8, 12, 16, depending on the restaurant. Residential exhaust, how often would that run? Maybe an hour a day or something like that? And compared to what they're cooking, of course, Neil and Troy, a lot of ethnic cooking in residential, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's not as grease-laden as commercial cooking. And I'm not trying to step on anybody's foot here, but I noticed in some municipalities, they will not allow you to use sheet metal screws in the joints. And that is a misinterpretation of the code, because the code will reference you, in the Michigan Residential Code, will reference you that the ductwork has to be done according to Chapter 6, or whatever the duct chapters, 15, 16, something like that in the residential code. And in that residential code, it says all round duct joints need to have screws. So therefore, technically, and they're worried about a little sheet metal screw going to collect a lot of grease and be a fire hazard. That's not how it is. It'd be a worse situation once the duct tape dry rots and the joint comes apart with not having sheet metal screws in it. So sheet metal screws are supposed to actually be in the duct joints of a domestic kitchen exhaust. If it's a round duct, because that's how the code is written. And that's my opinion. So, like I said, a lot of these kits come with, have you seen it? It's like a white flexible hose and whatever. You go out on the job and they install it. Yeah, but that's what the manufacturer wants. So that's not how it works. Underground systems. And it talks about, I've never seen one in all my years, but it's in the code that they can use PVC on residential underground systems.
Downdrafts.
Pardon?
Downdrafts.
Downdrafts?
Downdrafts.
Well, most of the downdrafts are go down the basement.
The Japanese cooking.
Japanese cooking?
If you have a basement.
Oh, okay.
These are, you see these commonly in restaurants that have the cooking.
Oh, the
table.
Kyotos?
Yeah, hibachi style,
Hibachis.
yeah, they'll have drafts going down and they'll be PVC down.
But it's basically, it says that it has to be below grade. You can't use plastic duct above grade. I remember one of the code hearings, one of the plastic duct manufacturers tried to get it approved above grade, and it got shut down. And it gives you a laundry list of what's required. So underground duct systems are allowed, but I've never seen them, but I guess like a Coyotes or Kyotos or something like Steakhouse or whatever.
Yeah, but that's strictly talking about domestic right there, not.
Right, right. Domestic kitchen exhaust equipment. There's going to be a change in the 2018 or 21 code, if and when we ever adopt it. And in the 21 code, it states that that if there is no natural draft appliances in the unit, dwelling unit or whatever, then this is no longer required, that you can bring all the exhaust in that 400 CFM. It's going to be taken away.
At the same time, you're dropping you to 3 air changes an hour
Yeah.
when you
So-
construct it.
But that's an exception. The only thing is if somebody goes back and puts in a natural draft appliance, I don't know. But the 400 CFM and the means of closure shall be automatically controlled to start and operate simultaneous exhaust system. Some barometric dampers that are used in this capacity will not work. They're not sensitive enough to actually open and close with the fan. There are some that will, the scuttle type damper that has the counterweight on it, if adjusted properly, it will. If the house is done properly, it meets the energy code and passes the blower door test, on the scuttle with the counterweights, when you turn the exhaust fan on, you'll actually go downstairs and actually see that counterweight open up. It takes a few minutes sometimes to react, but the more inexpensive dampers they use that, what do they got, duct tape on them or something?
Yeah, just a little flapper in there.
Flapper, they will not work. They're not sensitive enough. So a lot of heating contractors in my jurisdiction, they'll use an electric damper for that reason, because they cannot get the barometric to work.
I don't understand the bottom paragraph there.
It says back here in the brackets,
Yeah,
it says change in 2021 not required when direct vent or power vent appliances are installed in gravity vent are not being used. That's what I just talked about.
well,
There's a code change.
I'm thinking about kitchen, right? We're talking about a
Kitchen, right.
So where is there an appliance that's power vented? It's usually a range that's
Well,
underneath.
no,
the exhaust.
they're saying, what they're talking about, if you have a power vented water heater, a 90% furnace, nothing that's gravity vented anymore. That depends on, because what we're doing is creating a negative.
So we're not talking about a kitchen exhaust.
Well, they are talking about a kitchen exhaust.
They're
If it's more
taking
than
away
400
that 400
CFMs, they require
CFM.
you to have makeup air. What they're saying is they're not gonna require the makeup air if there's no draft hood appliances in there.
Somewhere else.
Where you could backdraft an appliance somewhere else in the house.
That's what they're saying.
So if you have a gravity hood hot water tank, a standard hot water tank that could backdraft, and you have a 400 CFM kitchen exhaust fan, you'd have to put makeup air.
But if there isn't anything, then it's okay to have a negative.
Right.
Once we get to the 21 code.
Right, once we get to the 21 code, probably after we all retire.
Section 505.3, this is an exhaust system for domestic kitchen. This is one of the worst codes that was ever put in by the state of Michigan. It says that when a cut is designed and installed to convey exhaust, shall be engineered by a registered design for it installed according with the Michigan Building Instruction Codes. It's ludicrous, because technically, the engineer designs it, he can show up using aluminum foil ductwork or whatever, or not comply with any of the requirements as far as sheet metal and stuff like that. If and when we adopt the 2018 or 21 code, this will, and when we were doing the 2018 code changes, in fact, this is over 3 years ago, I was in Lansing, and this was going to get nixed. They were going to go back and just adopt the ICC code.
Mark, what is the big problem with updating the code, is it adopting the code? Why are we so far behind? COVID. Well.
No, it's.
I guess, why not? Is anything else?
That's just super short.
It's political partly, and the state is.
You're working under a 2015 code, isn't it?
Hey, you're preaching to the choir here. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know what to tell you. They were going to adopt a 2018, and then they changed, which I think they're. Right now, they've put the 21 mechanical code in the back burner. They're working on the energy code right now. They can't chew gum and walk at the same time. I don't know why they can't adopt a whole bunch of codes all in succession. Look, we're in the, what code are we in, the plumbing code? 18. I was told by a prior employee that was the chief of the mechanical division that you couldn't do that. Herman Bennett told me that. You have to have, but I guess that his word doesn't apply anymore. But to be consistent, you have to adopt all the codes at once, but they're under 2018. So what happens if there's a reference to
The IPC.
and it's a,
We use the 15 for residential, and then the 18
okay, but
for commercial.
what if it references an energy code in the ICC, IPC, or the Michigan Plumbing Code for commercial? It references the energy code, and it's going to take you.
To the 15.
It's going to take you to the 18 code, where you thread. The state of Michigan, in front of the book, they cop out, and they say, any reference to this, and this code, instead of correcting it in each code text, it says, that really means this code. So that's how they get around it. Okay, this is the domestic exhaust, and other than Group R occupancies, where domestic cooking appliances are used for domestic purposes, shall be provided with domestic hoods, and the hoods shall be according to. If you have an office building, and in their lunchroom they put in stove, technically they have to put in a residential exhaust system by the standard. This is what it's saying. Because most office buildings do not have operable windows. So that's what this code is saying. It was added.
That's saying it needs a hood.
Well, that's what it's saying. You need a hood.
A hood.
Right.
Suppressed?
What about that?
Not
cooktop
suppressed.
being
Why
so
not?
close to that
Commercial
wood
building.
yard there?
Pardon?
What about that cooktop being so close to that wood yard?
If it's metal, it's gotta be 24 inches away. Looks like there's some sort of flat exhaust system there.
I'm talking about that sidewall.
Sidewall.
That's the refrigerator.
Oh,
About
yeah.
zero clearance.
Yeah, that is a violation. You can get that in, even in residence still. They'll put the stove in the corner, which is stupid to begin with. And now you've got the burners, that say in the manufacturer's instructions, they want that burner to be 6 inches away from a combustible wall.
You got that with some of these fancy wood hoods
Right,
where they're not high enough.
and they encroach in that space. You're right. Exactly. So, the 2015 still references the 2000 NFP 96 to 2001. This is going to be deleted, hopefully. That's what the plan was in the 2018. But if we adopted 2021, the state is trying to, the directive is that they want to put less items in the code and accept the ICC code carte blanche. That's their intent. There's several reasons for that. One is that if a state adopts the code without adding in any amendments, the ISO rating of the state for insurance purposes gets a higher number for that. As soon as they start adding stuff to the code, especially if it makes the code weaker or less stringent or less safe, then the ISO rating drops down and your homeowner's insurance goes up. As far as that goes.
So then you can never use an NFPA 96 after they take that out in 2018.
Or 2021, that is correct. The only reference, I think there was one reference to NFPA 96, but I'd have to look at the back of the book. Makeup air ducts. The concern here is, I don't see them too much often, but sometimes I do, where the hood actually, the makeup air actually comes into the cavity of the hood suppression system. There has to be a fire damper in that hood where the air comes into the plenum. And then any ductwork that is attached to that hood has to be constructed according to the Chapter 6. And it shall be non-convulsant, shall be listed for the application. So basically, they're saying anything within 18 inches has to be sheet metal duct, not flex duct like they're showing here. So I haven't seen, I used to see a lot of them, but not anymore. It's most of them now, the makeup air comes out of the front of the hood, or it's actually separate ducts. So I don't see any more makeup air coming right into the plenum of the hood plume. We've had outside kitchen exhaust ducts have to be made with corrosion resistant material or protected by a corrosion material, resistant material, either some sort of wrap that will prevent the duct from rusting, whatever. The ducts serving type 1 hoods shall be independent exhaust system. There is an exception that, I'm trying to remember, how's it read? If you want to type
They got to be on the same floor.
same floor,
They can't go through a firewall.
same sensors and everything like that. There has to be sensors in both the ducts, I think.
Right, and if it's all on one side, it becomes a one fire zone. If you got a hood on one side, a wall behind it, and another hood on the other side of that wall, that's a two-fire zone.
Right.
So,
I gotta tell you a story. You're familiar with Somerset Mall, the North Mall?
yes, Capitol Grill.
Capitol, go upstairs, that food court. Okay, all those restaurants in that food court, originally they submitted plans for one exhaust system for all the restaurants.
That's insane. But
So
it
I-
is on the same floor, they could do that.
Well, here's the thing,
Right.
I sent back to the engineer, I said, okay, how are you gonna design this?
Yeah,
If you get one restaurant that needs extra heavy-duty cooking, and then the other one, what parameters you can go by? What are you gonna do? And what if you don't design it enough for all the things? And so they backed off and made it every independent system for each restaurant. But it was just gonna be, it was gonna be a code enforcement nightmare as far as that goes. And so, that's why usually a separate system. You're looking at me like you wanted to say something.
You know, what if one of the restaurants is closed, the other ones are open, you know?
That was my other question too. Exactly. Yeah,
One
exactly.
fan goes out, you shut the entire food court down.
Yes.
One belt. One belt, that's all it takes.
Hey, Mark,
Yeah.
brick oven, wood burning pizza oven, and it has a flue. And now we've gotta have a hood over that.
yeah. gotta have
Don't go
that.
there. One of our meetings at Mechanical Board of Rules, over the west side of the state, they got an exception for that. You want to hear it was? There's two places, and the state had written them up. One was at Western Michigan University, and another one was another pizza place. One of them, was a pizza oven, okay? And they did not want to put a hood on it, and they only wanted to vent it by gravity, okay? And this was a solid fuel pizza oven, not one that you had chips to give it flavor. They actually use wood. Well, unfortunately, exception with two other guys that were on the committee, it was a whole new committee, and they bought into it and okayed it. Then the second one wasn't as bad. It was a gas-fired pizza oven, and they were putting exhaust fans on it, and they had safety devices to prove in case it failed that it would shut down. Both of them still required fire suppression though, due to how they were cooking. But that's exactly what happened. So they allowed it without pizza oven having without a hood.
Gotta have a hood.
They were given that exception. Now, mind you, that is not something right in stone. If somebody wanted to do again, they still have to go back to the Board of Mechanical Rules for that. It doesn't, anytime there's a ruling for that, it's not set in stone, because there might be other parameters, but you're right, because,
Because I had one, and they gave me the installation instructions. It was a company, I think Fortana out of California,
okay,
that said it was ETL listed without a hood.
okay. Neil, go up there and pick something out of the goodie pile. You too, Jeff. Go ahead,
We got
Jeff.
stuffed cabbage up there?
You know that's what I was aiming for.
Who wants
I
number
ain't gonna
six?
say nothing else.
You've already been eyeballing it up there.
Yeah.
Okay. If you have a question, I might allow you to go up there. Norwood, I got some pork rinds for you up there.
You know, Mark, just, we've had two fires, in restaurants in Dearborn, that I'm aware of.
Uh-huh.
Since I've been there 17 years. And one of them we just had, which was a wood burning barbecue. And it happened because they bootlegged this thing in and put it underneath the hood and didn't have the right
Suppression.
application and everything else. And it started a fire. They're lucky that they were able to save the building. And I came in and they're like, when did you approve that? I said, I never seen that. So that was one. But we did have a pizza oven as part of an Italian chain that was in at Fairlane Mall. And they put it in, and I remember Sam and I going through
Was
this
it a
thing.
Baker's Pride or a conveyor type?
No, it was one of these igloo ones out of California.
Okay, I know what you're talking about.
And we had a special hood duct for it, went all the way up, and had arresters, the whole 9 yards. And we did not put fire suppression on that. That was Sam's call. And
Why?
I don't know, it was his call.
Okay.
I was just with you.
Did it pass the,
You're guilty by association.
Yeah, I
did
know.
it pass that test for the, whatever, that 5 milligram or whatever?
I have no idea. I was brand new when we put this in.
Okay, so
And I was
it
just,
didn't-
I was
probably
just
didn't
rolling
pass that
along.
UL standard, obviously. So that was a
And that-
violation
that-
itself. Pardon?
They had arrested, that thing had actually created ember fires from the wood burning pizza oven. Went all the way up, 30 foot up into a duct system, through an arrestor system, and caught the roof on fire.
Sure.
And the only reason why the restaurant didn't burn to the ground, because the restaurant roof was under the guise of the cameras for the parking lot, so we had 24-hour security in the parking lot. And they caught it right away when the hood went on fire in the fire department. All those came out of those restaurants. I think they had a chain of 50 restaurants.
Okay.
and they all did.
Neil, what happened to the casino fire they had with the cooking system?
That was, you know what, I forget. Jesus Christ, man, I forget.
Hallelujah.
But I did go back and they had a appliance that they used wood chips for.
Right.
That they were exhausting it with the fryers and the griddles. I go, no, 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 no. This is a extra heavy duty appliance.
So they didn't segregate.
They didn't segregate. But after I got in there, they did segregate.
We had a Marriott in Troy. We were getting calls on cars going down Big Beaver saying there's flames shooting 40 feet in the air off the roof of the second story part of the kitchen. What happened there is it was the fire suppression did not kick in. It was plus a lack of maintenance too. That always happens. But the where the links were, you know, when you do the pull test,
Yeah.
the link was too close to the conduit fitting, so it wouldn't allow the pin to drop. So that's what happened there. So every time we do a hood test, I always make sure that the fusible link is at least metal or from on the other side, so that the conduit fitting, connector fitting, does not prevent the pin from dropping.
And there should be like, because that's required to be inspected every 6 months.
Right.
Actually, by NFPA 96, which they're going to take
Right.
out in 2018.
Yeah.
So there should be like special inspections in each city for an inspector to go out to these restaurants every 6 months and make sure they got that
There's a
tag.
bumper sticker. You are correct. But due to lack of staffing, that doesn't happen sometimes. Grease duct materials shall be constructed of minimum
Oh, I know, but it's an NFPA 96,
16
so it's a building
gauge
department.
stainless
It's
steel.
my issue. I should be able to go out there.
One guy at a time.
So the grease ducts have to be basically a 16 gauge steel. And the exception is factory built commercial grease ducts listed in UL 1978 in accordance to section 304.1. Captive air makes a system, and the commentary says that even though it's listed in the UL 1978, it still might have to be enclosed in a chase. The captive air system states right on there, it was tested by Intertech, and they were given a 2-hour rating with this. So if you're looking at a commercial manufactured grease duct system, even though it says UL 1978, you want to see if that was tested to a UL standard as far as having a 2-hour fire rating, so it doesn't have to be wrapped. Because the commentary almost talks like it could be UL 1978, but it still might have to be required to be closed in a chase if it's going between floors or whatever.
And they still gotta be fire stopped as they penetrate the floors.
Right.
What about hoods? You got an old stainless steel hood, and they want to re-put it back in service.
Is it a listed hood?
I'd say no.
Okay. In the 2015 codes, or 2018 code changes, I proposed to take out the allowance for unlisted hoods, but they didn't buy into it. They still allow unlisted hoods. Now, if you can wait just a slide, Christel, I'll tell you what happens when you have an unlisted hood. I have one coming up. So that hood could be reused, but then there's a lot of hoops they have to jump through. The joint seams and penetrations shall be continuous liquid weld or braze made in external surface of duct system. Then they give you a bunch of exceptions. It can be internal if the joints are ground smooth. Factory-built commercial grease ducts are limited to the UL 1978 installed according to manufacturer's instructions. Then they give you a list of different types of duct joints. There's a butt joint, overlapping joint, telescope overlapping joint. Then the duct to hood joints shall be made with continuous internal or external welded or brace joints to be accessible inspection. But then there's an exception for that you are allowed to go with a flange and then use a gasket that's rated at 1500 degrees. A good gasket material to use that is K-wool. And then it gives you a laundry list of different things that you have to do. Listed and labeled duct to hood collar connection installed according to the manufacturer's instructions if it's a listed joint. Duct to exhaust connections shall be flange gasketed at the base of the fan for vertical discharge and shall be flange and gasket inlet for the utility fans. Basically, what I make them do is lift up the fan and make sure that on a vertical discharge fan that they have some sort of K-wool on there or some sort of approved gasket. I come across once in a blue moon is this, they use, have you seen this, Mark, that foam rubber gasket they try using, which the stuff's combustible.
As long as it's rated to 1500 or higher, you could use it.
The foam I did, I took a piece of it and lit a match to it and it caught on fire.
I've seen them, they do have listed one for 1500.
Do they?
Yes.
And they're listed for grease resistant too?
It says just rating on them, temperature ratings on it.
Okay. If you have a vibration isolator, it consists of in a metal sleeve and approved design. It only shall be installed at connection to duct or fan inlet or outlet. Grease duct. This has changed now. There's other options that you can do. Basically, what you do is you put a 100-watt light bulb down it. When I do grease duct inspections, I I prefer that it's a twofold inspection. I make them, before they even put the ductwork, I have them set it on the floor and run the light through it to check the seams. It makes it easier for me, because once that ductwork gets installed, for some reason, all the trades are all around the ductwork, and if you try to climb on top of the hood, it's almost impossible to
Not
get to it.
mention, you could be in a very tight spot up there on some of these.
Yeah, exactly. So I try to leak test, white light test as much duct as I can, and then what other joints they have. One comment that I run across once in a while, and Jeff knows about this, is the contractor, before he calls you out for a light test, he should do it himself first before
Wow.
you get out there. Because,
Your weld's good, you're confident.
I mean, Jeff said, he said it looked like Christmas lights. I had one that looked similar to that, and I just stopped after the second piece of duct. I said, you know what, I'm done here.
Yeah.
Go back and recheck your welds, and then come. No, I can fix it right now. I said, no,
Yeah.
I don't have time.
Welder on the truck.
Yeah, so, has anybody had that problem before you get
Yeah.
out?
Yeah.
It looks
It's like, what's your
Swiss
rush?
cheese. Pardon?
It's like, what's your rush? Where are you going? I got my welder on the truck.
Yeah. So it even says it's permitted to test in section provided every joint is tested. For listed factory grease duct, this test shall be limited to duct joints assembled in the field and shall exclude the factory welds. With these factory built ones, there's not much to see though, and it's,
So I'm doing one tomorrow at Capitol Grill. And it's going up 3 stories to the roof.
yeah.
And I'm gonna have them bring a fog machine. And I'm gonna have them smoke test.
Yeah. I had one in Beaumont Hospital, and the ductwork was up on the roof, and it was a sunny day. So how am I gonna light test that?
Yeah.
So I told him, I said, put some it was a big duct. So put some cardboard down, and I'll crawl through the ductwork, and if I see any sunlight coming
Wow.
through. It was a reverse light test. It worked.
Yeah. If it's big enough.
It was big. It was a job done by Limbaugh.
How if you would've got stuck?
Pardon?
How if you would've got stuck?
It was a huge duct. It was the main kitchen duct for the cafeteria. It was Adam there. I met with Adam there, and he said, how are we gonna light test? This is up and it's a sunny day. Yeah, exactly. So what we did was they laid cardboard down because that duct was kind of greasy. And I just crawled through the duct and looked, and I didn't find any pinholes through it.
Oh, those are on the
Speaking
bottom.
from a contractor's point of view, I know what you guys are saying, to go out there, you know, why didn't they test it at a time? But as a good contractor, we test in the shop, all our shop wells, before it even comes out and we mark it. So that when you go in the field, you can see like what's already been looked at in the shop, and then we can focus in on our field wells, which, you know, that's really where we want to make sure that we're well and good in the field.
Right.
Really?
So there's alternatives if you want to require a pressure test
Well, they want.
and it holds that way. I don't have a problem with that as far as that goes.
Hey, Mark, if you did a pressure test, what kind of pressure would you use?
I would use a very low pressure.
Without.
Yeah, you don't want to use anything too heavy. And you want to have something like a magnehelic gauge or a water column gauge.
What, a pressure test?
Yeah.
You want to get political? You want to keep your job? Because those hardly ever pass. Hardly ever pass. Yeah.
We build it to withstand it.
Now,
You'll have to
in a grease
you'll have
duct
to deal on it
supports,
so fast.
the code says that the ductwork has to be properly supported. And plus, the criteria is not only for the weight of the ductwork, but the weight of the grease. And if it's larger ducts where people can go through it, also the weight of the person has to be calculated for that reason. Then there's, well, seismic we don't worry about, but it has to be non-combustible material. In most hangars, you want to make sure they go right to some sort of structure of the building.
It's also the weight of the fire ramp when you do it with black fire.
Right, the weight of the fire ramp, you got to add that up. The air velocity has been changed. Used to be, does anybody know what the old velocity was?
500.
No, it's 500 now. What was the old velocity?
1,500, I believe it was.
Somebody else. It was 1,500. I was hoping. Okay.
Can I get another bag of chips?
Yeah, go get another.
Go get another bag of chips. Okay. I have a trivia question for you. A draft diverter for a water heater or even an older furnace. What was the 3 criteria things that draft diverter had to do? The ASTUS in the Detroit heating examination. Does anybody know? Norwood should know.
Got a draft.
Why do you have a draft diverter?
Dilute
It was a manufacturer told
Wow.
dilutes the air.
The 3 things were
Secondary air.
for dilution air, but the 3 things was in case of a blockage, an event, that the product's combustion would be relieved out of the diverter instead of out of the bottom of the appliance where impingement would come. The second one was to reduce the stack effect so that all your heat would not be sucked out of the appliance when you have a windy day or whatever. And the third one was if you do have a bad draft, it comes out of the diverter and not down where the burner's at, so it doesn't blow the pilot out or cause the flames to shoot out the bottom of the appliance. So that was the reason why we have diverters. But we don't see them anymore, except for what? Boilers and conventional water heaters, right?
Oil appliances have been heavily used on the draft diverters. Oil burning equipment, recyclable oil.
Yeah. I got to tell you a story about oil burners.
Please, share.
In 2009, the week before Halloween, I got called out. We had a dead body down the basement of a house, 2800 Binbrook, which backs up to the Rouge River. There's an oil furnace in there. And what happened was a raccoon had climbed down the chimney and blocked the chimney. I read the manufacturer's instructions, and it said that if that furnace was installed in Canada, it would have to have a vent blockage safety switch, but not in the United States. So when we had the 2021 code hearings, with the help of Underwriters Laboratory, I had put in the code, and it's now a requirement in 2021, that all oil-fired appliances have to have a vent blockage switch. And the funny thing was, I was brought in for a deposition because it did over $100,000 worth of damage from the oil soot, and the insurance company was suing the manufacturer. And one of the attorneys asked me, because in Canada it was required but not in the United States, the attorney asked me, he said, what's the difference between a Canadian raccoon and an American raccoon? But because of that, and I didn't even realize it, gas furnaces, you have some sort of safety device that event gets blocked, but oil furnaces don't. But in 2021, if and when we ever adopt it, of course we don't see much oil around here, it's mostly northeast. But believe it or not, I went on the internet, and there's been several cases of animals getting trapped in oil furnaces and killing people. So in the 2021 code, it's going to require that all oil-fired appliances have some sort of vent blockage switch in it.
Nice.
Because of that reasoning.
How about boilers?
Pardon?
Boilers.
Oil-fired boilers would require it.
How about gas-fired boilers?
Gas-fired boilers have a spill switch on
Got a
them.
stack switch.
The stack switch.
So they do got it, just the oil don't got it.
Oil doesn't have it.
It's weird.
Here's that laundry list of the separation of grease ducts. It has to meet all these four things, all interconnected hoods located within the same story, all connected hoods within the same room as joining rooms. Interconnect and do not penetrate fire-rated assemblies, and there is no solid fuel-fired hood. As far as that goes, so that's that list that you were talking about when they want to have one duct system. Okay. Duct clearances, and if it's you reference NFPA 96. Can someone tell me, raise your hand, don't blurt it out. What does NFPA 96 say for the duct clearances from combustible materials? How many inches?
18.
No.
Say it out loud.
Yeah, raise your hand.
Raise your hand.
Go ahead and get this up, it's 18. Okay, it's 18, and then they have something called, in NFPA 96,
Fierce reduction.
not clearance reduction, they call it
Limited combustible?
limit combustible.
Drywall.
And it's, yes, it's
3 inches.
3 inches. No, you're done.
No, that's
You're
it.
done.
It doesn't matter, I said it louder, even though you had the
Okay,
answer.
like I said though, what it's gonna do is they're gonna take this out and put this back to the ICC code. Exception listed factory labeled commercial grease ducts installed to
Matter
manufactured
of fact, Mark,
structure.
if I may, this is why we have air gap between every hood, a 3 inches of air gap, for limited combustible, in case if you have a dry one in there. So that behind, right
The hood
behind
has
the
that
filter,
built
there's an
in,
air gap
right.
in there.
Okay, go ahead, you can grab something, Mike.
What?
Got it.
Okay. He's
Mark,
right,
grab that
the
bag of
hood
chips.
itself has a 3-inch gap, so it
Oh, yeah.
can meet that NFPA 96 requirement.
He said he grabbed the
Going
back.
through the roof, you got the foam on top of that steel.
You're exactly right.
Which is combustible.
You're right. You gotta be careful of that.
Oh, through the roof deck.
In Royal Oak, we have this problem. And that is, they put a hood in, and then they want to run it all the way back to the back of the restaurant, and then you go up outside. And one of them was 75 foot. And I said, well, wait a second, we're gonna have to have it pitched a 2% slope. What do you're gonna, by the time, from where you make the connection to the hood, that hood's gonna be like at 4 feet above the floor to meet that requirement. So there is an exception that you can put in a grease reservoir, and we'll talk about it in the next slide. So, but the grease hood, the ductwork is run for horizontal, and does have to be pitched either back to a hood or an approved grease reservoir.
Now, Mark, NFPA 96 says every 12 feet horizontal.
What's that?
Clean
Clean
out.
out. What would take precedence?
This wood?
Why would that, not the more
Be-
stricter?
Because in the code it says standards referenced by the code. There's a conflict between the code and the standard reference, and the code takes precedence.
Yeah.
Here's the grease duct reservoir. Now, it doesn't say that you have to have a pipe to it or anything like that. But what it does is explain how much of a depth and the bottom slopes to drain. When manufacturers, but it's basically, that's the way to get around it if you're running the ducts this is a horizontal. Perfectly, I like to see them run with not as much horizontal as possible. Clean outs. Be spaced not more than 20 feet apart, be located within 10 feet of a change direction. Somewhere I thought, clean out serving inline fans, there has to be a clean out within 3 feet of the fan connection. That's on your utility type fans. I had an inspection about a month ago, and they used the grease wrap, and you know the steel bands that you secure the grease wrap with? They had the steel bands going around the access doors. And I said, no. I said, get the manufacturer instructions of that grease wrap. They show you how to make the access door. And Mark, how do they do it?
Normally, you cut the same materials as the jackets, like a blanket.
Right.
You put it in there where the stick pins on the
Okay.
cap itself. And then you put a galvanized on the outside with a long butterfly nuts. So
Okay.
it has like a system. It will be like probably 10 to 12 inches thick, because you gotta double up and then galvanize.
Right.
So you're gonna be moving 3 items or 4 items in order for you to get to the cap on the inside.
So have you seen it where it's been done wrong before?
All the time.
Yes. So
Duck mates is way better for clean out, like for these stuff.
okay.
You can wrap it with just a separate jacket, and then you just remove the jacket and then remove the butterfly and get it out.
Okay. So what you want to do then is probably when you meet the contractor out there, have them show you the instructions that come with that grease wrap.
A lot of time what I do, I take a piece of paper and then I'll draw for them how to do it. A lot of people, they're not willing to go to the
No,
manufacturer.
I've run across that too, that they don't do it properly as far as the grease accent for the duck wrap.
When we purchased the access doors, Mark, we purchased the access doors with like a orange bolt extension
Okay.
on the door. That's where your layering comes in, when you put in the wrap, the plate, the wrap and the plate, but you gotta have the bolt extensions with the access door, and then it falls into place.
Okay, let's take a break for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll finish this up.
It's crazy, right?
You're lying.
This is the underground grease duct installation. And basically, it's gonna have to be 16 gauge metal and then coated, or stainless steel, having them in 18 gauge. Basically, I guess it would be and it has to be encased with a minimum of 4 inches of concrete, and it must slope to grease reservoir. And then if there's any sort of cleanouts, they have to be on the top side of the duct. And then the cleanouts locations shall be identified with access to an interior space. Here's an example showing that. Grease duct enclosures. If the duct serving a Type 1 hood penetrates the ceiling, wall, or floor, or any concealed space, shall be enclosed from the point of penetration to the outlet terminal. Inline exhaust fans not installed, not located, shall be enclosed as required for the grease ducts. A duct shall penetrate exterior walls only if there's where unprotected openings are permitted by the International Building Code. got to be careful here. If they, a lot of times they'll run the duct through a wall and then run it up alongside the building. You need to talk to your building inspector and find out if the exterior wall is fire rated. Several times it would be, especially if there's two buildings close to each other. That wall has to be a fire rated wall. So you're not allowed to have a grease duct go through that wall. I'm trying to think, who's my building inspector is here? Is it 2B? Which one requires that the outside walls have to be fire rated?
I don't remember.
Does anybody in the building code remember what it is? Is it 2B or 2B protected, I think it's called. Those walls, exterior walls have to be fire rated. And therefore you would not be allowed, according to this code section, to penetrate the exterior walls.
Say, Mark?
Yeah?
So the termination of the duct, grease ducts, they gotta be 10 feet away from a lot line or a building.
We'll talk about that in a second. Okay? You're getting ahead of me here.
Sorry.
That's fine. The enclosure has to run from the penetration all the way up to the roof. A lot of times the manufacturer's instructions want you to wrap it all the way to the hood. Then there's an exception that if it's just a grease duct going through a drop ceiling to the roof, then it does not have to be an enclosure. As soon as that duct leaves that room where it's in and goes through a wall, then all bets are off, then it has to be enclosed. And the enclosure, it has to be such grease ducts shall have clearance to combustible structure not less than 18 inches and have a clearance to non-combustible and gypsum wallboard not less than 6 inches. And the duct enclosure shall be sealed around at the duct point of penetration and vented to the outside of the building in use of weather protected openings. Then they talk about the field applied in duct enclosure. And this part right here, you could almost have a separate seminar. In fact, I thought I had not a contractor, but a company that makes this, they wanted to come in today and also talk about, but just the brevity of time, it would have taken too long. The grease enclosure shall be installed according to listed manufacturer instruction. Partial application of field applied duct enclosure shall not be installed for the sole purpose as reducing clearances. So in other words, you just can't, where it goes up through the roof, and it's a wooden roof, you just can't use the material just where it goes through the roof. You have to take it all the way down to the hood. And then it talks about the UL standard and F&T ratings. And then we talked about earlier the grease duct fire resistant access openings. On that, I think I got a picture. So here they're showing the grease duct enclosure. And they're showing here one where it's just partially enclosed, and that is prohibited by code.
By manufacturer as well, too.
Manufacturer's instructions. Now we're talking about what you were talking about, Neil, that the exhaust outlets, a lot of times, I know we talked about plan review, but what you have to do is you have to, on the plans, make sure that they give you a site drawing showing where the boundary lines of the buildings, because it says here, they shall be not 10 feet away from any same or continuous part of buildings and adjacent property lines shall be located not less than 10 feet above the adjoining grade level. Exhaust outlets shall not be less than 10 feet horizontally or 3 feet above an air take opening. That's also talks about in chapter 4. Exhaust outlets can be, shall not be less than 5 feet from parts of the building adjacent when the exhaust is discharged away from it. Captive Air sells elbow fitting that goes on their kitchen exhaust hood, that it's like a 45-degree elbow. So it, like, let's say your exhaust fan's too close to another wall. What I just had one like that they're on plan review, and they're using this Captive Air 45 that it's going to direct the exhaust farther away from that wall, as far as that goes. So if you can direct it. In Royal Oak, we have a problem because we have restaurants that are less than 20 feet wide sometimes. And what I do in that case, I tell them that they need to make sure the exhaust discharge is in the middle of the building as far as that goes, and as long as they discharge it away from the building. So I allow them to go less than 10 feet if they can show me it's in the middle, because there's a hardship there. I know it's not written that way in the code, but I don't know any way else, and I don't want to look like the bad guy, I guess. But in most cases, the way they do it, it doesn't cause a problem.
So on them strip malls and stuff where they got that terminating up right next to the next strip mall, that's the property line.
That is correct.
So you see that all day long, every day up on the road.
Well, that's why they need to make sure that it's located 10 feet away or directed away from the property line. Have it directing back toward that way instead of directed onto the building.
So if you got an up-blast fan, how are you gonna direct that away from the lot line?
They do make the attachment, you're saying right now that they do make an attachment that goes on the outlet of the
Fan.
blast fan.
Captive Air does it. I imagine some other companies do too.
Flips on.
With the elbow that discharges?
Correct.
Yeah.
They do have an extension, they do have elbow.
I know the extension they got, but I didn't know they had the
They do
elbow.
have elbow.
Yes. Here's the through an
So
exterior-
going back to that other slide for a second, what is same or contiguous 313.3? Exhaust outlet shall be located not less than 10 feet horizontally from parts of the same or contiguous buildings. What's contiguous?
That means the buildings are right next to each other, in line. I wish the one.
Strip mall with individual sections, that the roof line would be contiguous, they're all the same, but they're individual buildings.
The walls don't extend above the roof line.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Flat roof.
A lot of times though,
Okay.
a lot of your strip malls, they might have separate addresses, but if you look at the legal document,
It's all-
the owner owns the whole strip mall. But for address purposes, they have different addresses. That is not considered really a property line.
How about that adjacent buildings?
If adjacent building, there would be a concern.
I mean, isn't that an adjacent building next to it, though it's on the roof?
Yeah.
Which-
Yeah.
So then still, whether it's like the strip mall is one property or not, it's still saying adjacent buildings, because you don't know if they're gonna build that up. That's why I'm thinking it's there, because we've had situations like that where they built a roof up, and there was an exhaust fan right there.
So when they build the wall up, they created the violation, then you would write it up then.
And then you'd leave it alone.
There's a saying in ICC, you can't write something up on the pretense that something might happen down the road. Termination through an exterior wall. And then we need to be going through here. Then type 2 terminations. 3 feet away from any openings of buildings, shall not more than 10 feet property lines on the same lot. Outlets shall terminate not less than 10 feet above grade. And then outlets terminate not less than 30 inches above the roof surface, and not less than 30 inches from vertical walls. Outlets should be protected from local conditions, not should be directed into walkways. Mackinac Island is a violation, but shops, they
Mark, how come that's not addressing mechanical air intakes?
That's a.
What type 1 hood does? Termination.
What do you mean?
It's saying 3 feet in any direction from openings into the building.
Right.
But how about a mechanical air intake? That's 10
You
feet.
would apply chapter,
401.3.
yes. The ductwork for type 2 hoods have to comply with chapter 6, which is the SMACNA HVAC duct construction guide. I already did that. How did that happen twice? Exhaust fans. And basically, these UL 762, once you got 762 on the fan, you're pretty much home free as far as the requirements. But you want to discharge it so it's not impinging on the roof or other parts of the structure. The vertical discharge should be manufacturer-approved drain and a grease reservoir. So that's a 762 fan comes with that. Then you have the inline fan. See, here with this inline fan, if it's required to have a duct wrap, the fan itself is supposed to be wrapped, which is almost impossible to do around the motor. So I tell them to do the best they can, and they wrap them. Because if you wrap the motor, I have a concern that that motor might not get proper ventilation, and the motor might overheat, and we're causing more of a fire than if we left it unwrapped. Exhaust turbine, type 1 shop with clearance or combustible at 18 inches, so that's the same. And then the termination, we already went through that. The exhaust fan mounting, talk about the hinge and use of flexible weatherproof electrical cable, permit inspection and finish of a restraint for the fan so it doesn't flop all the way over. Anytime you do a restaurant, you always want to open that up. It's a Limbach job, but it wasn't you guys, it was the electrician. It was Delphi's cafeteria, and I was checking for the cable jacket on the fan, and the seal type for the fan, they drilled a hole through the grease duct and wired the fan. So you never know what you'll find, Mark, out there. But the Limbach got an extra for that one to fix it. And the superintendent from Limbach, he was ticked because he was mad at the electricians for doing that. In fact, they didn't follow the manufacturer's of fan because it showed to run the electrical outside and not up through the fan itself.
I've caught that as well on the job.
So,
Culver's.
I got pictures.
oh, they actually they did it?
I don't believe it. Let me see the picture.
They did that.
Kidding.
Culver's, they did that?
Yep.
Which city are you in?
Canton.
Canton. Oh, wow.
It's my favorite hamburger joint.
Mine was at Meyer.
Yours is at Myers?
Yeah, the deli that they installed, the electrician right with them.
Yeah, so, yeah, that's one good reason you want to make sure the electrician did wire the fan. So here we have the fan with a hinge and the chain restraint, the grease reservoir. But a lot of times you go up on the roof later on and nobody knows that you're supposed to empty that reservoir once in a while and it spills all over the roof. And then they have to clean up the roof.
Birds do
We're getting into hoods right now. And then it gives you a list of everything. Basically, what this section is saying, if it's a UL listed hood, there's a bunch of code sections that do not apply for that. Let me see if I got a list here. Here they are. If it's a UL labeled installed, it should not require to complying with section type 1 materials. 2, the hood joints, seams and penetrations, grease filters, the size and location, capacity, the non-canopy size and location, and exhaust outlets. So how do you install these listed hoods? Does anybody know?
Read the installation instructions.
You're done.
For the manufacturer.
For the manufacturer. Did you get a candy yet?
No.
You go up and get one.
There ain't no more chips up there anyhow.
There might be something she likes. It's per the manufacturer's instructions, and the manufacturer will tell you how far the hood has to overhang of the appliance. As far as that goes, it'll tell you what the height of the appliance is supposed to be for the hood. The label, there's a label on the hood. Do I have that? And we'll talk about the label in a minute. So there's all these sections that we don't enforce, but there is a section here in the table 403.3.11. I write up in my plan review, I say, okay, you got this oven, you've got this and this and this. Then they come back and says, well, these are listed, they don't need a hood. And I says, well, you're not out of the ballpark. You still have to provide, according to Chapter 4 in the ventilation code, for every appliance, you have to provide 100 CFM of exhaust. Now, it doesn't have to be a hood or anything. It just says exhaust in the kitchen. So,
We approved a Crave, it's called Crave Hot Dogs. I believe they're a chain out of Florida.
right.
We had one open in Canton, and it was the same situation. I'm talking roller grills, a couple turbo shafts,
Right.
no hood in the kitchen. But we did, and it was per plan, they already planned for it. They had like 150 CFM continuous operation fan in the kitchen.
Yeah, but how many appliances did you have?
I think there was 2 turbo chefs or 2 Mary chefs,
Okay,
and then a roller grill.
okay.
300.
That was
That's
it for
300.
the cooking appliance.
That's 300. Now, did those, were those UL certified that they do not
Yes, for
produce?
the 0.5 milligrams, yes.
Is it 5 milligrams? I thought the word 5.
It's 5.
It's 5.
Okay.
Here's the thing though, you got to look at the test results. You asked for that. I think I talked about it in plan review. Because those were tested with a specific type of food. It will tell you, like, an example is the test will say white meat chicken's okay, but not Darton, because it's greasy. So the test, you have to make sure that whatever food that was tested to, that's what's on the menu. In other words, if they have one that's tested and they're cooking something more, that's more greasy.
It was no chicken,
Was it, there was no raw protein?
no raw proteins, everything was pre-cooked.
But you still have to have the exhaust ventilation.
Correct.
Yes,
Correct.
so that's what the deal is there.
Then you still gotta provide a manual J helo calculation that shows.
Yeah, not manual J, it's manual N. J is
Okay.
residential, N
Right.
is
And-
commercial.
Yeah,
Yes,
yes.
manual N
So you still
calculation,
need-
that, because I had one where I made them put a mini split in because they didn't have enough air conditioning in the kitchen.
And they provided the helo calculation
And
for
they
you?
And they couldn't meet it.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so they have to supply a manual in calculation, not just showing the loads for the appliances, but the whole kitchen itself.
Yeah,
And to see if the air conditioning. I think that's the only time you'll find written in the code where air conditioning is required. That if the kitchen is air conditioned, you have, now if it wasn't air conditioned, then it doesn't, except with the makeup
Right.
air.
right.
Makeup air has to be within 10 degrees of the
Technically,
particular.
yeah,
What requires a kitchen to have to be air conditioned?
The engineer having it in there basically. The code doesn't.
Most are.
But then again, how about that section, Mark, where it says you can't bring in air more than a 10-degree difference?
Then the room temperature.
Yep.
But
Well, that's.
it's saying that in that code, it's saying you have to provide air conditioning.
Because of the 7-degree.
No, because it has to handle the latent insensible heat gains caused by the appliance. So therefore, according to this section, and it's coming up, that you have to air condition the kitchen if you're going with that exception.
And that makeup air don't just talk about heat, it's just makeup air.
Yeah.
You know, you gotta keep that 10-degree differential.
But a cooling load in the kitchen can change drastically. Well, I want to know your equipment.
Well, that's what they'll have to show. They'll have to show. You have to air condition, it says the HVAC system has to handle
Yeah?
the latent insensible heat gains from that appliance.
Yeah.
Because what we're doing here in the prologue of the ventilation code, the whole thing is it's steam, grease-laden vapors, products of combustion, and the last thing that it has to control is heat. It even says that in the statement for exhaust, that you have to exhaust the heat. So what this exception says, no, you don't have to exhaust the heat as long as your air conditioning can handle the heat. In other words, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen.
Wow. That's a good one.
So no, it has to be air conditioned though, if they want to go with that exception. Here's a deep fat fryer with a recirculating hood, still requires that 100 CFM. And plus
Yeah.
the heat loss and heat gain calculation. There's a technical bulletin on that UL standard for, UL standard 711 for recirculating systems stating that you have to still calculate for the air conditioning load. Here's an electric griddle with a recirculating hood. So what they're saying here, you're not out of the ballpark complete. You just can't say, well, there's no exhaust required because I got a recirculating hood.
Right.
You still have to provide that 100 CFM of exhaust for each appliance.
It still provide the heat load calculation.
And exactly. Here's the downdraft exhaust system again. When I worked for the city of Troy, the Troy Fire Department got tired of going on fire runs all the time because people weren't turning on the kitchen fans when they turned on the cooking equipment. And so when the cooking equipment's turned on, the fan's not turned on, the
Fusible link.
fusible link and extinguishing system. So they put in, and they're allowed to fire, they can put in under anything they want, I guess they're special. They put in their ordinance that they had to have some sort of device to make sure that the fan would come on with that. And I was talking with Guy Coberlin from Arlington, Virginia about this, and how we did this, and he goes, Mark, that's a great idea, let's put it in the code. So Guy Coberlin put it in the code that that it has to be activated by a radiant or temperature sensor. But the only way we could get this passed was because what happened, the manufacturers of the commercial cooking equipment that uses stand-in pilots, they said, well, we don't like this unless you put something in this code language that it will not cause the pilots to be extinguished from those appliances if it gets activated. So that's what we came up with, is the hood sensor on that. And it should come on within 15 minutes of the first appliance. So technically, the way I read this, Mark, you can just go up and turn on one range.
Within
in
a
15
couple of minutes, you should be able to build enough heat to activate the system.
Right.
Because these sensors, they're set from 110 to 120 degrees, which is very easy to build that 120
Right.
right away.
Yes. So I know the Captive Air, their sensor is variable depending on how much heat, as the more heat's
Certain
generated.
one, not all of them.
But that's a nice.
Based on how you design your
Yes.
system.
So that's the reason why we did that. So that's where that came from.
So then the best thing to do is when you're going to do an inspection is not even turn the switch on to the exhaust. fan.
Exactly.
Just turn on the appliance, right?
Just turn on the appliance,
Been doing that
correct.
for years.
And then they talk about multiple sensors. If it's a single fan, they have to send both on. Oh, it's, yeah, 5 milligrams at a flow rate of 500 CFM. So, so you see here that it's either got to be type 1 or type 2 hoods. Fuel burning appliances are located in the same room. So, and here's this, the 507.1.3 is your water heaters. If they're located in the same room or space as a hood, provision shall be met to prevent the hood from interfering with normal operation of appliance vents. So if we have a gravity vented water heater in that restaurant and it's open to where the hood's at, then you have to provide some sort of means in case the makeup air fails to shut down that water heater. But a lot of restaurants are going with direct vent water heaters now anyway. Domestic cooking appliance used for commercial. I don't even know why they put this in the code, because the statement in itself is a violation of
It's
the code.
not listed for commercial use.
Exactly, and the same thing the other way around. Commercial appliances, you can't put in a residential. So why are you saying
Probably like
that?
for office building.
Well, it's saying for commercial purposes. And it
Well,
says,
you can use that in a restaurant. You can use a domestic cooking appliance in a commercial building, which is a restaurant, but not the other way around. You can't use a commercial appliance in a residence.
I beg to differ with you.
Well, that's not the way I'm reading it.
Because it says in the chapter 3 that the appliance must be installed according to its listing.
The listing will say prohibited for
Residential
commercial
use only.
But that is specifically saying, if you can go back,
On the appliance itself, the manufacturer will tell you it's prohibited
Right.
to be used for commercial.
Plus, most of those residential ones do not meet NSF anyway, standards. and the health department not allow. Fuel fired appliance, same thing here. Exhaust fold label. I put a note here. What happened is I would go and do an inspection, and I look at the label on the hood, and it says you need so many CFM for this temperature. You need so many CFM for this cooking temperature. And I'm going, I could care less what the temperature is. I have to know what duty appliance I'm here. And so what we did was I had put in the code, the hood shall bear a label with a minimum exhaust flow rate CFM per linear foot of the hood that provides capture and cooking. And it should be based on the cooking appliance duty classification defined in this code. So now, after having some conversation with Captured Air for over 6 months, it says, I don't care. It's in the code now, and you have to comply. They do it now. They both put the temperature and the duty appliance.
That was the best thing.
So, because as inspectors, we don't deal with temperatures. We deal with light duty, medium duty, heavy duty, and extra heavy duty. So that label didn't mean anything to us. Extra heavy duty, separate hood and separate ducting. Now, heavy duty is solid fuel, but there's a fork in the road here. If the way the code interprets it, that you're using the solid fuel as
Flavor.
the cooking. Now, if it's for flavor, that is not heavy duty. Am I right?
Smokers, no, it's not all under heavy.
In fact, in the
No,
21
no,
code,
it
there's an
does.
exception for a smoker's
It does,
oven.
even if you use.
No, there's, in the 21 code, it even talks about flavor.
Well, I don't know about the 21 code, but NFPA 96 is clear. If you use wood of any quantity to flavor food, it is considered an extra heavy duty appliance. NFPA 96. If I had it, I'd show it to you. Yep,
I'm just telling you that
it's in there, Mark.
it's only used for flavor, and it's not used as a
So it
primary
says
fuel.
It's in
Sealed
there.
combustion and sealed chambers where the food is stored inside the appliances. This is what is differentiated between extra heavy duty and then light duty.
And
Or
usually,
medium
the
duty.
wood doesn't even catch on fire, it just sits there and,
It's in NFPA 96, it's clear, it says even if
I-
you use wood for flavoring, it's considered an extra heavy duty
I
appliance.
think the intent of the code, if it's used for flavoring, it's a different story.
And I called NFPA and they agreed.
Well, NFPA is gonna be out anyway, and whenever they adopt a new code. Duct supports. Clearances at NFPA 96. We talked already about that. Type 2 hoods. Pretty much shall be installed above appliances. Question for you. I don't know if it's in this code or not, but somewhere I read in the code or an interpretation. If they put in a type 1 hood in a restaurant, and they're saying we're only going to use it for type 2 cooking,
They still gotta have fire suppression.
it still has to comply with fire suppression
Not
and type
comply.
1. Pardon?
Not compliant only. This type one hood used for type 2 appliances. You need to protect behind the filter and then the duct itself.
Right. But it still has to be protected because somewhere down the road, maybe somebody decides to change it. So if you're doing a type 2 hood cooking, put a type 2 hood in. Don't put a type 1 hood. Performance test is in the Bureau of Construction Codes. It talks about how to test it. Half the burners need to have boiling water. You use a smoke handle. Everything's be running. I make them lock the doors on the restaurant to make sure there's that proper makeup air. Because if they leave a door open, that could throw the makeup air off and not give a true reading. There's examples of it.
So Mark, going back to that other picture, prior, yeah, right there. So if you're doing a smoke test, that smoke rolls out over the filter and down and out of the hood, and then it's blown back by the PSP. Do you accept that as a pass? I don't,
You mean it's rolling out? Why is it rolling out though?
because they're not exhausted enough CFMs.
Or they're not using whatchamacallit? Side curtains, yeah.
Yeah.
It rolls out.
And it's
Yeah.
blown back. They go, oh, it's blown, it's
But you know what,
blowing
but
it back.
usually when that blows like that, some of it still stagnates there, and not all of it doesn't get sent back. But rarely do I have systems that fail anymore, especially with captive air. Those systems work great.
If
So-
I have any smoke that rolls out of that hood and that PSP pushes it back, it's a fail.
Yeah, that's your interpretation. If that's what you feel, it's the only thing consistent. Compensating hoods and makeup air temperatures. The temperature for the makeup air has to be within 10 degrees of the room temperature. So not only is it heating, but if the kitchen's air conditioning, it has to be 10 degrees. Now, the commentary makes a comment that if the makeup air is right next to the hood, they feel that it doesn't have to be tempered because it's going to be sucked right into the hood. That's their comment. I mean, you can take the commentary with a grain of salt or not. But it's not only, I always thought it for the longest time was just heating only, but it's technically for heating and cooling. Let's see if I got a picture. There's one that does both heating and cooling. It's a makeup air unit that does both. Compensating hoods has to have a label of how much they're allowed to compensate. Fire suppression is according to the building code and fire code when it's required and how it's done. What is the NFPA standard that we use for hood suppression? Don't say anything, Neil. Does anybody know the standard?
17.8.
Pardon?
17.8.
Okay.
Hood suppression
Yeah,
and fire code.
right. I think that's it. Okay. We'll call it